First story. My mom cheated, claimed none of us were dad's kids, and tried to replace him with her affair partner. But I'll always choose my real dad over them. Growing up, I always thought our family was like any other, until everything came crashing down when I was just 7 years old. My older siblings, Alex 9 and Mia 10, and I were blindsided when we overheard our mom telling our dad she was leaving him. That alone would have been devastating, but then she dropped a bombshell. She claimed none of us were dad's biological kids. She even told us directly, saying that the man she was leaving to be with, Mark, was supposedly our real dad. She wanted us to accept him and become one big happy family. Dad refused to believe her at first. He insisted we were his kids and promised us that even if biology said otherwise, nothing would change how he felt about us. He demanded DNA tests, though, to settle the matter. When the results came back, Alex and Mia were confirmed to be his biological children. But me? I wasn't. My biological father was Mark. It was like my entire identity shattered in an instant. I couldn't stand the idea of being connected to this stranger, and knowing my mom was thrilled to have even one of us be Mark's child made it so much worse. She acted like it was some kind of victory. I hated it, hated her for it, and hated Mark for simply existing in this mess. Despite everything, Dad refused to let go of me. Legally, he was still my father, and his name was on my birth certificate. He fought tooth and nail to keep custody of me, even though my mom and Mark tried every trick in the book to take me away from him. It was an unusual custody battle since Alex and Mia were definitely dads, and I wasn't. But he argued that we were still a family, and a judge eventually agreed. Dad was awarded 50-50 custody of all three of us. Mom and Mark tried appealing, even dragging in a guardian ad litem and CPS to argue their case, but nothing changed. I stayed with Dad half the time, just like my siblings. Mark made it clear he didn't care much about Alex and Mia since they weren't his biological kids. His focus was on me. He and Mom went above and beyond to try to win me over, showering me with gifts, planning outings, and telling me I should start calling Mark Dad. But I never once wavered. I already had a dad, an amazing one, and Mark would never ever take his place. The tension between us never eased. Every visit to Mom's house was a battle. Mark would try to bond with me to create some kind of special connection between us, but I shot him down every time. I wouldn't let him get close. He wasn't my dad. He was just the man who wrecked my family. A year ago, I tried to take things to court again. I begged a judge to let me live with Dad full-time, but my request was denied. The judge ruled that I had to keep going to Mom and Mark's house until I turned 18, or Dad could face fines, or worse, lose custody altogether. It crushed me, but I didn't want to cause Dad any more pain than he'd already endured, so I stayed quiet and kept enduring those forced visits. Last week, everything boiled over again. Mark had planned some fishing trip for the weekend and expected me to join him. I didn't go, of course, and that set him and Mom off. They confronted me, saying I'd never refuse something like that if Dad had asked me. They weren't wrong, and I told them as much. That only made them angrier. Mom said I was being unfair and hurtful, always choosing Dad over Mark. I didn't hold back. I told them, point blank, that Dad is my real father and always will be, while Mark never would be. I said they destroyed my life the moment they revealed the truth, and I'd never forgive them for it. I also told them Mark didn't get to borrow me when it suited him like I was some kind of toy. They tried to guilt me, scolding me for being disrespectful and childish. I walked away mid-lecture. I'd had enough of their attempts to rewrite history. Now, as I count down the months until I turn 18, I'm torn. Part of me wants to stop going to their house entirely, but I know Dad could suffer the consequences if I do. So for his sake, I keep going. But no matter how much longer this lasts, one thing will never change. Dad is my real father. Biology doesn't define that. Love does. Second story. The truth behind the betrayal. How my dad took advantage of my friend and my mom covered it up. 16 years ago, when I was just a 15-year-old girl, my world was shaken. My family had opened our doors to two of my closest friends and their mother, who were going through a difficult divorce. I remember the situation vividly. There was a lot of tension in the house, but we all tried to make it work. My two friends, one of them 14 and the other 16, were staying with us during that turbulent time. One night, I went to stay at a friend's house, as I often did. The next day, when I returned home, my mom sat me down with a serious look on her face. She told me that she had kicked my friends out of the house. At the time, she said it was because the 16-year-old girl had made a move on my dad. It sounded so unbelievable, but I didn't question her at the time. It was clear to me that she was upset, and naturally, I believed what she told me. She painted the 16-year-old as the villain, someone who was trying to tear our family apart. As a teenager, I didn't fully understand the complexities of what might have happened. But as I grew older, something didn't sit right with me. That story, the one my mom gave me, felt too simple. I could tell there was more to it. Over the years, I would often think back on that moment, wondering what the real story was. The curiosity lingered, gnawing at me as I reached my 20s. Eventually, I decided I needed answers. I reached out to the 16-year-old girl, who by then was also in her 20s. We hadn't really spoken in years, but something about this unfinished chapter in my life compelled me to find out the truth. When we met up, I could see the pain in her eyes. It was clear that this was something she had been carrying with her for a long time. She had never gotten the chance to tell her side of the story, and she was clearly burdened by it. And then she told me what really happened. She shared that, in the years since, she had been in therapy, trying to make sense of everything. She revealed that it wasn't her trying to make a move on my dad. It was the other way around. She described how my father had manipulated her, using kindness and affection to gain her trust. They had been drinking on the property that night, and somehow that led to them going skinny dipping in the pool. It all seemed like harmless fun at first, until they ended up inside the house and, eventually, upstairs. It wasn't long before my mom walked in on them. That's when everything changed. I was devastated by what I was hearing. The father I had known and loved for so many years, the man I had seen as a protector, had crossed an unforgivable line. And my mom? She didn't believe her, didn't protect her. Instead, she kicked them out of the house and slandered the girl's name. As she spoke, I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger. Not just for her, but for me too. This truth, which had been hidden for so long, had been buried in the depths of my mind. It made me realize how much I'd been conditioned to keep quiet, to push my emotions aside, to just accept things the way they were. But now, as I sat across from this woman, I knew that I could no longer ignore it. I told her that if she ever needed to take action, I'd be there for her. I would stand by her. Now in my 30s and a new mother, everything has come rushing back. I have a daughter of my own now, and the thought of anyone doing what my father did to this young girl fills me with rage. The protective instincts of motherhood have awakened in me, and I can't stay silent any longer. If someone tried to do that to my daughter, or if I caught my husband in that situation, there would be no forgiveness, no second chances. For years, I suppressed all of this, the rage, the disbelief, the pain. I learned to bottle it up, just as my parents had taught me to do. But now, with my own child, I realize just how much damage that mentality caused. The anger I buried for so long has erupted, and I'm furious. Furious that my father has gotten away with it for all these years. Furious that my mother has never held him accountable. I know that if I confront my mom about this, she'll just brush it off. She'll tell me that it's the past, that people change, that I should forgive and move on. But I know my dad hasn't changed. He's the same man he was all those years ago. Angry, controlling, narcissistic. And my mom? She's so caught up in him that I honestly wonder if that girl was the only one. Was she his only victim? If she was, and he never did it again, does that make it forgivable? I don't think so. I don't think I can forgive him. I want to tell the rest of my family, but I know how they'll react. They'll downplay it. They'll say I'm overreacting. They'll call me crazy. They've done it before when I've tried to call them out on other things. So, I'm left here, alone with this truth, struggling with what to do. Would you tell your family? Would you confront them? Or would you just keep it all to yourself like I've been doing? I honestly don't know what to do next. But I do know that I can't live with this anger inside me any longer. Third story. My overbearing mom violated my privacy, exposed my pregnancy secret, and judged my abortion decision. Now I'm wondering if it's time to move out. Yesterday, I went to a concert with a feeling of freedom, only to return home and instantly sense something was off. It wasn't the usual, I've been out all day feeling. It was something deeper. The moment I stepped into my room, the unease hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm almost 21 years old, and yet, my mom's overbearing presence still looms over my life like an unwanted shadow. I knew she'd been pushing me to stay on birth control, and honestly, it's been one of the worst things I've done for my health. The constant side effects, the hormonal imbalances, it's been a nightmare. So after much thought and careful consideration, I decided to switch to an IUD. It seemed like the only option that would work for me. But then, life threw a curveball at me. I found out I was pregnant. For a brief moment, I thought my world had crumbled. I didn't expect it, didn't want it, and most importantly, I knew I wasn't ready. So I made the decision to have an abortion, along with getting the IUD put in. It felt like the only way out of this mess, but I had to keep this information from my mom. I couldn't let her know. Not because I was ashamed, but because I knew exactly how she'd react: cold, judgmental, and completely unsupportive. My mom has always been one of the least comforting people I've ever known, and her reactions to my life choices have always been harsh. I couldn't even begin to imagine how she would handle hearing about my pregnancy, the abortion, and the IUD. So, I kept it all hidden. But then yesterday, when I got home, I walked into my room, and it hit me. She had gone through my stuff. I couldn't shake the feeling. I tried to ignore it, but everything felt off. When she came home later, she insisted on talking in my room. Immediately, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Something about the way she asked didn't sit right with me. I refused, sensing something was wrong. Instead of respecting my boundaries, she just shrugged it off and casually asked about my day. But that's when it happened. She casually dropped the bombshell. "Show me your birth control pills, so I know you're taking them." I froze. It was like the world stopped spinning for a second. My stomach dropped, and I could feel the blood drain from my face. My heart raced as I realized she had gone through my personal stuff. My drawers, my things, she had seen everything. She had seen the positive pregnancy test I'd hidden away. I hadn't even told her about it yet. And there she was, confronting me like I was some kind of child who needed to be controlled. Instead of offering support, understanding, or even an ounce of empathy, her only words were, "Abortion isn't a form of birth control." That was it. No comfort, no care, just judgment. I felt completely violated. I felt like my privacy had been ripped away from me in an instant. How could she not understand that this was the hardest thing I had ever had to do? How could she make it about birth control and not my emotional well-being? I felt so alone in that moment, more alone than I've ever felt before. I keep wondering if I'm wrong for feeling this way. Is it unreasonable for me to want some space to make decisions about my body without her interference? Should I be more open with her? Or is this enough of a violation to finally take the step of moving out? I'm honestly at a crossroads right now. I never thought I'd be faced with this level of violation from my own mom. I don't want to cut her out of my life. But how do you heal from something like this when you're just trying to make decisions for your own future? So, am I overreacting, or am I right to feel completely betrayed? And how in the world do I keep moving forward with my plans when I can't even trust the one person who should have my back?